I knew the HOA was bad, but I never expected them to straight up demolish my property in broad daylight. I was at work when I got the call from my neighbor, an older guy named Frank. He didn't mince words. "Travis, you need to get home. Now." "What? Why?" I asked, glancing at the clock. It was barely noon. "They're bulldozing your deck." I thought he was joking, or maybe mistaken, but Frank wasn't the kind of guy to exaggerate. I grabbed my keys, left work without another word, and drove home like a bat out of hell. When I turned onto my street, I saw it immediately: the construction vehicles in my backyard, the sound of machinery roaring, and my beautiful cedar deck reduced to splinters. And right there, standing with her arms crossed, wearing an obnoxiously smug grin, was Gloria Davenport, the HOA president, and my own personal nightmare. I barely put my truck in park before I jumped out. "What the hell is going on?" I shouted over the noise. Gloria turned to me, not the least bit fazed. "Oh, Travis. You're here earlier than expected." "Yeah, no thanks to you. Why are you tearing down my deck?" She sighed like I was the one being difficult. "This is all part of the new community pool project. We had a vote." "What vote? I never agreed to this." She waved a manicured hand dismissively. "Well, it passed. We needed the space for the pool expansion, and your property was the perfect location." I clenched my fists. "This is my property, Gloria. You can't just bulldoze it." She gave me a condescending look. "Travis, your deck was in violation of HOA guidelines anyway. It was an eyesore. So really, we're doing you a favor." I took a deep breath, trying not to lose it. "You do realize this is illegal, right?" Gloria scoffed. "Oh, please. The HOA has full authority over neighborhood improvements. You should be thanking us." I turned to the workers. "Shut it down. Now." One of them hesitated, looking at Gloria. She rolled her eyes. "Don't listen to him. He doesn't have jurisdiction here." That was it. I pulled out my phone and started snapping pictures. The damage, the workers, the machinery, all of it. Then I called my lawyer. Gloria laughed. "Oh, Travis. A lawyer? Over this? You're being dramatic." I ignored her, stepping away with my phone pressed to my ear. "Hey, Mark? Yeah, I need you. HOA just bulldozed my deck." "Yes, bulldozed." Gloria finally looked a bit uncertain. "This is a community project, Travis. You can't stop progress." I met her gaze, my voice cold. "Watch me." Mark didn't waste any time. By the time I hung up, he was already pulling up legal statutes, asking for photos, and preparing to file an emergency injunction. Meanwhile, Gloria was still standing there with that self-satisfied expression, as if she had already won. I turned back to the crew. Some of them were starting to look uncomfortable. They weren't just demolishing a structure, they were actively destroying private property, and they knew it. One of the workers, a guy in his mid-40s with a shaved head, wiped the sweat from his brow and hesitated before switching off his machine. "Hey, lady," he called to Gloria. "You sure you got the right permits for this?" Gloria's expression tightened. "Of course we do. Keep working." But the guy wasn't convinced. He pulled a folded piece of paper from his back pocket and checked something. "Yeah, see, I got a work order from the HOA, but it doesn't mention anything about tearing down a private deck. It just says prepare ground for community expansion." That's real vague. I pounced on that. That's because she doesn't have permission. She's acting outside the law. Gloria's nostrils flared. "Don't listen to him. The HOA has full authority over neighborhood improvements." The guy frowned. "I dunno. This sounds shady." He turned to the rest of the crew. "Shut it down, boys. We're not getting sued over this." The machines went silent. Gloria whirled on them. "I am the president of this HOA. You work for me." The guy crossed his arms. "We work for whoever signed the contract. And if you signed an illegal one, that's on you." Before she could argue, Mark called me back. His voice was sharp and businesslike. "Travis, listen carefully. I just checked the county records. Your property is not common land. The HOA has no claim over it. And get this, their permit for this pool expansion, it was rejected last month." I gripped the phone tighter. "Rejected? Then how are they even doing this? They're banking on you not knowing the law. They probably figured you'd just roll over." I glanced at Gloria, who was now furiously whispering to another HOA board member who had slinked onto the scene. "Not happening." Mark continued. "I'm filing an emergency cease and desist. You'll have it in an hour. In the meantime, document everything. And Travis, yeah, don't let them move anything else." I hung up and turned to Gloria. Your permit was denied. That stopped her cold. That's not possible. County records don't lie. So tell me, Gloria, what exactly was your plan here? Just hope nobody checked. Her face twitched, but she recovered quickly. The HOA's authority supersedes. No, it doesn't. She took a step forward, lowering her voice. Listen, Travis, we can work something out. Maybe I was a little overzealous, but this pool is going to raise property values for everyone, including you. I folded my arms. You just destroyed part of my house. Why would I ever trust you? She sighed, clearly trying to mask her frustration. Fine. What do you want? I narrowed my eyes. Rebuild my deck. She scoffed. Absolutely not. Then I'll see you in court. For the first time, I saw a real concern flicker in her eyes. She turned back to her board member, whispering furiously. I couldn't hear the words, but I didn't need to. She was scrambling. I walked over to the construction crew boss. You guys are gonna want to get out of here. This is about to get ugly. He nodded. Yeah, we're done. Not worth the legal headache. As they packed up, Frank approached from his yard, shaking his head. I told you this HOA was bad, but this is a whole new level of stupid. Yeah, I muttered. But they just dug their own grave. Mark arrived an hour later, paperwork in hand. He wasted no time serving Gloria in front of the entire neighborhood. She tried to argue, but he shut her down with legal jargon so fast that even I had trouble keeping up. When she realized she was backed into a corner, she did the only thing she had left. She tried to bluff. This injunction means nothing, she declared to the watching crowd. The HOA will fight this in court, and we will win. Mark adjusted his tie. Good luck with that, because once we're in court, we'll be discussing damages. And since you acted without authorization, you'll be personally liable. The color drained from her face. Frank chuckled. Guess that pool's gonna be real expensive for you, huh? Gloria turned on her heel and stormed off. But I wasn't done, because Mark had uncovered something even bigger, something that was about to shake this entire HOA to its core. Gloria had been embezzling funds. And now I had the proof. The moment Gloria stormed off, I turned to Mark, who was flipping through the documents he had printed out before coming over. Frank lingered nearby, arms crossed, watching the HOA board members huddle together like panicked hens. I kept my voice low. You sure about this? Mark didn't look up. Oh, I'm sure. I pulled the HOA's financial reports. There are discrepancies all over the place. Funds allocated for projects that never happened, payments to contractors that don't exist, and the best part? There's a whole separate account under Gloria's name, disguised as an operational expense fund. Frank let out a low whistle. So she's been skimming off the top? Mark nodded. For years, from the looks of it. I exhaled sharply. How much? Mark finally met my gaze. North of 200,000. Frank let out a sharp laugh. She's cooked. I took another look at the HOA board members, who were now whispering furiously amongst themselves. A few of them kept glancing my way, clearly aware that something bigger was at play. Gloria was nowhere to be seen. I had a feeling she was already scheming her next move, but it wouldn't matter. Mark continued. We can take this to the county fraud division. If we push hard enough, there'll be a full audit of the HOA's finances. And once that happens, she's done. I didn't hesitate. Do it. Mark pulled out his phone and stepped away, making the call. Frank clapped me on the shoulder. I gotta say, Travis, I admire the way you're handling this. Most folks would have lost their minds by now. I gave a dry chuckle. Believe me, I wanted to. But now? Now I just want to watch her entire empire crumble. Frank grinned. You're about to get your wish. The next 48 hours were a whirlwind. The county fraud division didn't take long to act. By the following morning, an investigator was already poking around, asking questions. Mark had handed over all the documents, and within hours, a deeper audit was launched. Gloria must have caught wind of it because she vanished. No emails, no phone calls, no visits to any of the board members. It was as if she had disappeared off the face of the earth. But the HOA board? They were panicking. I spotted a few of them going door to door, trying to do damage control, but word had already spread through the neighborhood like wildfire. Everyone knew about my deck. Everyone knew about the illegal demolition. And now, the cherry on top, they knew their HOA dues had been lining Gloria's pockets. By the end of the second day, the board held an emergency meeting at the community center. I showed up. The place was packed. Homeowners filled every seat, standing against the walls, murmuring amongst themselves. The tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. I spotted a few of the board members sitting at the front table, looking as if they'd rather be anywhere else. The HOA treasurer, a balding man named Richard, was sweating through his dress shirt. Next to him, a woman named Linda kept wringing her hands. They all looked miserable. Richard cleared his throat. Thank you all for coming on such short notice. We have some serious matters to discuss. Someone from the back shouted, "Where's Gloria?" Linda flinched. She has stepped away from her duties for the time being. The crowd erupted. People shouted over each other, demanding answers. I stepped forward. Linda's eyes widened. "Travis, now is not the time." I cut her off. Now is exactly the time. The room quieted. I turned to face the crowd. How many of you have been hit with random fines over the years? How many of you have paid for community projects that never happened? Murmurs of agreement rippled through the attendees. I continued. Well, turns out, Gloria wasn't just incompetent. She was stealing. Over $200,000. And now that she's been caught, she's suddenly disappeared. Gasps spread through the room. Richard's face turned beet red. Now, hold on. We don't know that for sure. Mark spoke up from the side of the room. Actually, we do. The County Fraud Division is already investigating, and an official audit has been launched. The evidence is overwhelming. Linda buried her face in her hands. Richard tried again. Listen, we were just following Gloria's lead. I cut him off. You mean you turned a blind eye while she treated this HOA like her personal bank account? He had no response. A man from the front row stood up. I say we vote to dissolve this entire board. Cheers erupted. Richard paled. Wait, that's not how this works. Mark stepped forward. Actually, it is. According to HOA bylaws, if a majority of homeowners vote for board dissolution, the entire leadership can be removed and replaced. Linda's voice wavered. We can fix this. But the crowd wasn't having it. People were already shouting for a vote. And in the end, it wasn't even close. By the end of the night, the entire HOA board had been ousted. But I wasn't done. The fraud investigation was still ongoing, and as it turned out, Gloria had done more than just steal money. She had been manipulating property lines, forging documents to claim land for HOA control, including mine. And thanks to that little stunt with my deck, she had left a paper trail. With Mark's help, I filed a civil suit. By the time the courts were done sorting through everything, Gloria was facing criminal charges, and the HOA was forced to liquidate assets to cover the damages. And guess who bought up the foreclosed properties? Me. Within a few months, I owned nearly half the block, including the HOA's former office building. I turned it into a community center. No HOA. No ridiculous rules. Just neighbors looking out for each other. And as for Gloria? The last I heard, she was still tangled in legal battles, drowning in debt, and trying to outrun the consequences of her own greed. Funny how things work out. With Gloria gone and the HOA dissolved, the neighborhood had transformed. The tension that once hung over everyone like a dark cloud had lifted, replaced with an almost festive atmosphere. People were reclaiming their properties, painting their homes however they pleased, and even putting up decorations that would have sent Gloria into a fit. No more arbitrary fines, no more ridiculous restrictions. Just freedom. But I wasn't done yet. Mark had been digging deeper into the HOA's financial history, and what he uncovered was even worse than we had initially thought. Gloria hadn't been working alone. There were former board members, ones who had conveniently stepped down months before the scandal broke, who had also been involved in the embezzlement. The fraud investigation had expanded, and subpoenas were being issued left and right. One name that kept coming up was Douglas Whitman, the HOA's former vice president. Unlike Gloria, who had been flashy in her corruption, Douglas had always stayed in the shadows, quietly maneuvering behind the scenes. He had resigned 6 months earlier, citing personal reasons, but in reality, he had been cashing out before everything collapsed. I had a feeling he was still lurking, waiting to see if he could reclaim control. My suspicions were confirmed when I spotted him at a local cafe, speaking in hushed tones with a couple of former board members. Mark had warned me that the remaining corrupt members might try to salvage what they could, either by forming a new HOA or by deflecting blame from themselves. I wasn't about to let that happen. I walked straight up to their table. Douglas looked up, clearly annoyed at being interrupted. His cold, calculating expression barely changed. Travis, something I can help you with. I pulled out a chair and sat down. Just thought I'd check in. You know, since the HOA's gone and the fraud investigation is still picking up steam, one of the former board members, a thin man named Leonard, shifted uncomfortably. We don't know anything about that. I leaned back, folding my arms. That's funny, because your name's all over the financial records. Payments to accounts that don't exist, funds allocated to maintenance projects that never happened. Sound familiar? Douglas didn't react. He took a sip of his coffee as if I were discussing the weather. That's a serious accusation. I didn't blink. And it's going to carry serious consequences. You think Gloria was the only one who's going to burn for this? The county's not stopping with her. They're coming for everyone. Leonard looked at Douglas, panic creeping into his expression. I told you we should have left town. Douglas shot him a warning glance before turning back to me. You don't have any real evidence against me. Mark had prepared me for this. Actually, we do. You might have resigned, but you were still signing off on financial decisions long after you left the board. The paper trail doesn't lie. For the first time, I saw something flicker in his eyes. A realization that he wasn't as untouchable as he thought. Douglas set his cup down carefully. What do you want, Travis? I let the silence hang for a moment before I spoke. Accountability. You're going to cooperate with the investigation. Hand over every document, every email, every transaction you were involved in. And you're going to do it now, before they come knocking on your door with warrants. Leonard looked like he was about to be sick. And if we don't, I shrugged, then you take your chances in court. But let's be honest, Douglas. You're smart enough to know how this ends if you fight it. Douglas studied me for a long moment, then exhaled slowly. Fine. I'll hand over what I have. Leonard gawked at him. You're just going to roll over? Douglas didn't take his eyes off me. It's called survival. I stood up. Smart choice. You should have made it sooner. By the end of the week, Douglas had turned over enough documents to bury half the former board members. The fraud investigation expanded, and before long, multiple arrests were made. Some of them tried to flee, but law enforcement was already tracking their movements. Gloria, it turned out, had been hiding out in a distant relative's vacation home, hoping the storm would pass. It didn't. She was arrested on multiple charges, including fraud, theft, and destruction of private property. The moment the cuffs went on, every news outlet in the area picked up the story. The HOA wasn't just corrupt, it had been a full-blown criminal enterprise. With the neighborhood free from its grip, people started rebuilding literally and figuratively. My deck was fully reconstructed, bigger and better than before. The former HOA office, now a community center, became the heart of the neighborhood, hosting events, gatherings, and even legal workshops to help people understand their rights as homeowners. And as for the properties the HOA had once controlled, I had acquired nearly all of them. Douglas, in a last-ditch effort to save himself from worse charges, had liquidated his assets, and I had been waiting. The moment they hit the market, I bought them up. The same went for every foreclosed property connected to the scandal. By the time everything settled, I didn't just own my home. I owned the very land the HOA had once ruled over. No more power-hungry board members. No more fines. No more fraudulent schemes. Just a neighborhood that finally belonged to the people who lived in it. With the corrupt HOA dismantled and most of its former board members facing legal consequences, life in the neighborhood had finally settled into something normal. People were enjoying their newfound freedom, repainting their homes, putting up decorations, and even organizing neighborhood events without the looming threat of arbitrary fines. The transformation was undeniable. But there was still unfinished business. Gloria's trial was approaching, and while she was already buried under fraud and theft charges, there was one final piece of the puzzle that needed to be dealt with: the damages owed to the homeowners who had been wronged. That included me, of course, but I wasn't the only one. Over the years, she had strong-armed dozens of people into paying unjust fines, forced others to rebuild parts of their homes to fit her personal aesthetic, and even had a few families evicted under fraudulent pretenses. Mark had been working on a class action lawsuit, and with the evidence I had gathered, it was almost a guaranteed win. The only problem? Gloria had liquidated pretty much everything she owned. Her house, her car, even her overpriced designer furniture had been sold off to cover her legal fees. She had nothing left to pay the people she had wronged. That was, until Mark found something interesting. Buried deep in the HOA's financial records was a property that hadn't been seized, yet a plot of land on the outskirts of the neighborhood that had been slated for future community development. It was still registered under the HOA's name, meaning it was technically up for grabs now that the organization no longer existed. And, as luck would have it, the land had been purchased using embezzled funds. That meant the county was seizing it. And guess who had first rights to claim it under the lawsuit? The homeowners. At the next community meeting, Mark laid it all out. The land was ours if we wanted it, and we could do whatever we pleased with it. Some people suggested selling it to divide up the profits among those affected. Others wanted to turn it into a park or a community garden. A few even floated the idea of building a small recreation center where kids could play and families could gather. I had no strong opinion on what to do with the land, as long as it benefited the community instead of being wasted. The HOA had taken enough from us, it was only fair that we took something back. After a long debate, the majority agreed on a plan. The land would be turned into a shared green space, with a playground, walking trails, and a small pavilion where people could hold events. It was poetic in a way. The same HOA that had spent years controlling every inch of the neighborhood would now, unintentionally, leave behind something that actually improved it. Construction began a few weeks later, and to say the neighborhood was excited would be an understatement. People volunteered to help where they could, donating supplies, planting trees, and even helping with some of the manual labor. It was the kind of community effort that would have never been possible under Gloria's rule. Speaking of Gloria, she was still locked in legal battles. With no assets left and no way to pay restitution, her only option was to serve time. The judge didn't go easy on her, either. Between the fraud, the destruction of my property, and the sheer number of homeowners she had wronged, she was looking at a long stretch behind bars. The day of her sentencing, a few of us attended the hearing out of sheer curiosity. She looked nothing like the woman who had once lorded over the neighborhood, barking orders and issuing fines like a tyrant. She was thinner, her once perfectly styled hair was dull and unkempt, and the arrogance that had been her trademark was nowhere to be seen. Mark leaned over to me as the judge read out her sentence. Think she ever saw this coming? I shook my head. She thought she was untouchable. When the judge handed down a multi-year prison sentence, Gloria barely reacted. Maybe she had finally accepted her fate, or maybe she was just too exhausted to fight anymore. Either way, her reign was officially over. The neighborhood celebrated that night, not out of cruelty, but because it was the final nail in the coffin of the corrupt system that had ruled over us for so long. People gathered at the newly built pavilion, sharing food, drinks, and stories about their past run-ins with the HOA. As I sat back, watching kids run across the freshly planted grass and families laughing together, I realized something. This wasn't just a victory over Gloria. It was a victory for all of us. A neighborhood that had once been divided by fear and control was now stronger than ever. People knew their rights. They knew how to stand up for themselves. And most importantly, they knew they didn't need an HOA to tell them how to take care of their own homes. Frank walked over, handing me a cold drink. You did good, kid. I chuckled. Took a team effort. He nodded, watching the festivities. Yeah, but you got the ball rolling. I took a sip and let out a satisfied sigh. Guess I did. And for the first time in a long time, everything felt right. The neighborhood had changed for the better, but I wasn't quite ready to step back and let things coast. The fallout from the HOA's demise had left behind a mess, and while most people were celebrating, there were still loose ends to tie up. Some of the homeowners who had suffered the worst under Gloria's rule were still dealing with the financial strain of her ridiculous fines and fabricated violations. Not everyone had been able to bounce back as quickly as I had. Mark and I had been working on a plan to redistribute what remained of the HOA's seized assets, and while the green space had been the most visible victory, there were still funds left from liquidated properties and recovered dues. Instead of letting the county absorb the remainder, we pushed for a neighborhood compensation fund. Every homeowner who had been wrongfully fined or forced into unnecessary expenses would be reimbursed. At the next community gathering, I stood in front of the crowd and laid it out. The HOA took from all of us, some more than others. And while we've stopped them from doing any more damage, that doesn't mean we should just forget what they did. Mark and I have been working with the county to make sure the money they stole gets back to the people it was taken from. Murmurs of interest spread through the crowd. Some people still carried the weight of the HOA's past actions, and the idea that they might finally be made whole again was something they hadn't dared to hope for. One of the older residents, Mrs. Holloway, raised a hand. "So you're saying we're getting our money back?" I nodded. "Every penny we can recover." A younger man near the front, Jason, frowned. "And who decides who gets what?" "Some of us lost more than just money. The HOA made my parents sell their house when they couldn't afford the constant fines." "How do you fix that?" "That was the hardest part. No amount of money could undo all the damage, but we could at least try to make things right. We're prioritizing those who were hit hardest," I said. "Anyone who paid bogus fines, who was harassed into unnecessary renovations, or who was unfairly evicted. Mark's handling the legal side of it, making sure the distributions are fair." The tension in Jason's face didn't completely fade, but he gave a slow nod. "It's more than I expected," Mrs. Holloway sighed. "More than we ever got when that woman was in charge." Frank, standing near the back, grinned. "And we're never letting it happen again." The crowd erupted into cheers. The relief was palpable. It wasn't just about the money, it was about closure. Over the next few weeks, checks were sent out, and people finally got back what had been taken from them. For some, it was a few $100s. For others, it was thousands. The biggest check went to a family who had been forced out of their home under fabricated violations. They had moved to a nearby neighborhood, but when they received the funds, they made an announcement. They were coming back. That was the moment I knew we had truly won. With the last of the HOA's influence wiped away, the final step was making sure nothing like this ever happened again. At the next meeting, we drafted a set of neighborhood guidelines, not rules, just agreements between neighbors. Things like maintaining property responsibly, handling disputes civilly, and keeping community decisions democratic. No single person would ever have unchecked power again. As the meeting wrapped up, Mark pulled me aside. "You know, Travis, you could step back now. You don't have to keep running things." I exhaled, looking around at the people chatting, smiling, planning for the future. "I know, but I kind of like seeing this place thrive." Frank overheard and clapped me on the back. "You've got the heart of a leader, kid. Just don't let it go to your head." I chuckled. No chance of that. With Gloria locked away, her cronies exposed, and the neighborhood finally free, I could finally take a step back and just enjoy my home. The deck that had started this whole mess was better than ever. Every time I sat out there, watching the sun set over a neighborhood that was finally ours again, I felt a deep sense of satisfaction. This was how it was always supposed to be. And I wasn't going to let anyone take it away again.